All right, so this week I want to talk in the kind of sharing section about changes to the WOTUS. Shane, do you use the word WOTUS on a regular basis?
I thought I was feeling pretty dumb there. Have not a clue what a WOTUS is. I thought it might be a bug.
Yeah, it's a WOTUS. It's if you cut them up really small and put and cook them over a fire and put a little bit of olive oil on them, they're pretty good.
Okay.
Now, WOTUS is waters of the U.S. So during the Obama administration, the waters of the U.S. ruling was expanded to include ephemeral and intermittent channels. And part of the reason for this was related to head of hollow fill sites in West Virginia, where people would cut down an entire mountain top and then just fill those mountaintops in the hollows or the valleys down below there. So they basically flatten out mountaintops. And those mountaintop mine removals were within driving distance to Washington, D.C., so they got a lot of political action, and they created a ruling that took jurisdiction for navigable waters on these ephemeral and intermittent channels. There's been a lot of people that thought they were right in doing that. There's a lot of people that thought they were right in not doing that. But this week, the current administration reversed the rulings and actually took away some additional safeguards for water quality. And I wanted everybody to be aware of this ruling. It will have a major impact to what we're doing. Now, I don't need to give you a commentary on my thoughts because my thoughts don't mean much about this, but I want you to be aware that it's out there and that it's been changed significantly. So the new ruling talks about 4 categories of waters that are federally regulated: territorial seas, traditional navigable waterways, perennial intermittent tributaries to those waters, certain ponds and lakes and impoundments, wetland adjacent to jurisdictional waters. And then it also takes away 12 categories that are excluded from waters of the U.S., such as features that contain water only during direct response to rainfall, so ephemeral features, some intermittent features, features that are farther away from navigable waters. And in doing this, what we'll see is that tidally influenced bodies of water will still be jurisdictional. Anything like the Mississippi River or the Great Lakes will be jurisdictional. You know, people can navigate on them. They're always going to be jurisdictional. When we have people that can navigate for recreation but not for commerce, then if it's a tributary to a navigable water, then it will still be jurisdictional. If it's just recreational and it's not a tributary to navigable water, then it may not be jurisdictional anymore based on how often it flows. Snowpack fed intermittent tributaries will stay jurisdictional as well. Perennial channels will stay jurisdictional. Some karst topography channels where we have limestone underbed, we have caverns that were jurisdictional will now not be jurisdictional. And particularly in Texas, they have a lot of areas like this. Lakes, impoundments, and ponds some of those will stay jurisdictional, but it says certain lakes, impoundments, and ponds will become jurisdictional. So there'll be a lot more rules related to what becomes jurisdictional and what doesn't. There's a new idea of how they redefined the normal flow on a site or the typical water year. So they have a new white paper on what becomes typical water year. You can use geomorphic features and biological features for typical water year still. So you can still use things like what was used for wetland delineations in the past, ordinary high water, or even bankful calls for looking at these jurisdictional features. But there's a lot of other features that will allow developers to say that it's not jurisdictional. And then traditional wetlands, so wetlands that have been made with infrastructure, borrow pits, could still be jurisdictional. They're adjacent to features. And then a lot of things that have changed is that dry washes and ephemeral streams. So in the southeast of the U.S., a lot of the bigger rivers are actually dry washes and ephemeral streams. They flow for the most part after rainfall, and they'll have wet periods of time. And the rest of the time, they don't flow. So at that point, what that means that people will be able to develop over those areas with no regulations. So if it's not mapped by a FEMA mapping, then they'll be able to develop over those areas and not have to consider the stream being there. And that's important for us to know for our clients, because it's not always going to be a good idea for them to develop over those areas, because if they're not mapped, they may still have a flood risk. It just may be an area that hasn't had flooding yet. And in the past, it was easy because they were jurisdictional. Now it won't be jurisdictional anymore. Isolated wetlands that are these are basically in the prairie pothole areas. There'll be a lot of prairie potholes that will not be regulated anymore. So people will be able to fill them in and use them for agricultural purposes or new development if they want to. Farm ditches. Most of River by Ranch would have classified as a farm ditch under this new rule. So that means that this area wouldn't have been able to be used for mitigation, or it wouldn't have had been mitigated for. So that would have made a huge difference on kind of finding mitigation as well as producing the need for mitigation. So it changes how debit and credit and mitigation occurs. Roadside ditches have been jurisdictional in the past. If the hydrology was right, they won't be jurisdictional in the future. And then stormwater runoff has never really been jurisdictional. I don't know why the EPA thought they'd include it in here, but they did. And then farm and stock water and ponds have sometimes been jurisdictional in upland areas and sometimes haven't, based on other characteristics. So just wanted to provide that as kind of sharing a current idea of where, there's this new rule for the waters of the U.S. or the WOTUS. So Shane, I expect you to use that with all your friends, this week. Be like, hey, have you heard about the WOTUS? But that will have a significant impact on how mitigation is performed in the U.S. At least in the next couple years. You never know if this pendulum swims back and we get a different person in there. They may go extreme the other way and go back and forth. But for the time being, I wanted to let you know about that this week. Any questions, concerns, or comments related to that?
Other than the fact that it's pretty depressing that they're getting rid of more protections, but no surprise there, Dave.
Yeah, it's the first back step in the Clean Water Act since its establishment in 1972 by Richard Nixon, which is pretty significant. And because these ephemeral dry washes and these farm ditches are now not regulated as jurisdictional, they've also taken away the idea of some point sources on those areas and non-point sources on those areas. So in the past, you had to have on non-agricultural lands concerns about non-point sources, and on agricultural lands, we're concerned about point sources as well. Whereas now, most experts are saying that point sources on some of these farm ditches will be kind of not regulated at all anymore, which is a real bummer. Some of the things that had occurred with point source pollution on agricultural ditches in the past was related to pesticides, and some of the big environmental crises that caused the Clean Water Act were related to point source pollution from chemical pesticides on agricultural ditches. So. But now you guys know, knowing is half the battle.